Welcome to the Ugly Bug Podcast, a production of the Ugly Bug Fly Shop and Crazy Rainbow Fly Fishing.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on the Ugly Bug Podcast. I was fortunate enough to sit down with Jake Sabus today, and we had a unique conversation about a little Wyoming history. So look forward to sharing that with you. First, let's take a quick listener question. This question's from Chris in Idaho Falls, Idaho. Chris asks, Blake, I saw a TV show that you were on, and you guys were chasing carp. I'm interested in fly recommendations for carp on a lake. My local lake's very muddy, but I often see them jumping out of the water. Anything helps. Thanks a lot. So, Chris, you're seeing probably two different things. Not that carp won't jump to eat at times, but generally they're more likely to kind of slow slurp something in versus jumping. Chances are when you see them jumping airborne, they're actually filling up their air bladder to get some buoyancy, or they're getting rid of air so they can get a little deeper. So I wouldn't, it's unique to look at, and it's often a good indicator of where some carp are located, but trying to target jumping carp isn't going to be very successful. So I would focus more on, the kind of shallow shoals. You said your local lake's pretty muddy. So I would probably start, much like around here, I would start with bugs that would generally live in that mud. Carp love to eat leeches, crayfish, damselfly nymphs. But my go-to often is a crawdad pattern. If you are throwing a crawdad pattern, there's kind of carp-specific crawdad patterns, but really what sets them apart is that most of them have either a bead chain or a dumbbell eye tied to the top side of the hook. So when you think of a hook or a fly, if the dumbbell eyes are tied on the top versus the bottom, if they're tied on the top, that's going to cause the fly to roll upside down, exposing the hook point on the uphill side, much like a bonefish fly. And it's going to help your landing ratio, hookup ratio is much greater than it would if that hook point's riding down in the mud. So I would start with a crawdad pattern. The advantage to those kind of muddy flats is that you can often get a little closer than you would if the water was gin clear. So just move nice and slow. Often in those mud flats, much like around here, you have a very good chance of seeing basically a donut sort of situation where there's a carp in the center. If you would think of a donut hole of a donut, the carp's going to be in the center of that, in somewhat the opening. And then the outer rim where it's all muddy is actually the mud that he's kicking up as he's digging for crawdads or leeches or worms. So I'd say start with a crawdad. My preference is to always kind of start with black if I can. Black's oddly somewhat easy for you to see and kind of a natural thing if you're in a muddy condition. So stick to kind of mud colors if your local lake's pretty darn muddy. So best of luck with the carp, and thanks for the question, Chris, and let's jump in to our discussion with Jake about Wyoming history.
The Ugly Bug Podcast is proudly sponsored by Wyoming. Wyoming-rooted fly fishing apparel and accessories challenging the traditional mold, designed by anglers for anglers.
What's up, Jake?
Not much. How are we doing, Blake?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's talk a little Wyoming history. You've been around the area a long time. I know it's a topic that kind of fascinates you. Let's dig into kind of some of the stuff going on around Casper, and that someone, if they were to come out and visit Central Wyoming, could kind of check out.
Sure. No, that's the beautiful thing about Casper, Wyoming, right here, is that there is a lot of recent history of people moving through with the Oregon Trail, the Mormon Trail, the Pony Express, all the kind of like iconic, important things that kind of basically set up the West, all kind of transpired, and people went through Casper to do that. Of course, Casper wasn't here when that happened, but just outside of town, out at Bessemer Bend, there's kind of an interpretive trail, if you will, where you can kind of see where the Pony Express went, where the Mormon Trail went, and where the Oregon Trail went. And you can actually see rut marks of where covered wagons came through here at some point, moving west to try to find a place to live.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that you can kind of see the history of all that and to see how people kind of created the West. And this is a really iconic thing. And it's just something that's really neat to see that these people came through here not knowing what to expect, not knowing that Wyoming winters are certainly less than ideal here, and to even survive them.
Yeah.
With the clothing and food and everything else, how people were even able to make it through that is nothing short of impressive. So
way tougher than what I am. It's amazing that they made it. We've got some cool, a really cool kind of interpretive trails museum here in town that, allows you to like step inside of a hand cart and check out what it was like for the, the Mormon trail folks, as well as, riding a oxen pulled cart that kind of simulates that as to what it would be like to come out. I couldn't imagine making that trip, starting from St. Louis or Kansas City or whatever, and knowing what was in front of you. And then you kind of hit out here, and it's big country. It's really big country.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Kind of tough to just the simple things that we take for granted, like clean water and water itself, even finding it can be kind of difficult, especially when you kind of head west to Casper through the Red Desert. It gets pretty slim.
Pretty sparse. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these people had to have been tough as axe handles to be able to, even a common cold could have been a death sentence for you, and just so to see how these people were able to persevere with almost nothing and not knowing what to expect it's kind of neat to see. And the fact that it all took place kind of right here in Casper or the surrounding area is kind of neat to be able to be a part of and see a part of history that's fairly recent. You know?
So if you kind of follow the river outside of town, I don't know what that is, 30, 40 miles out to Independence Rock. But it's kind of one of those places to me, gives me, the hair on my arms kind of stands up when you walk around and see all the names inscribed in the granite. I don't know how you feel about it or how often you get out there, but it's pretty shocking.
It's extremely shocking to see, especially in that greater area right there where the settlers came over the Ferris Mountain right there. They call it Young's Pass, actually. It's just right across from Independence Rock, and that's where they came across through there. And just before that where they have the Mormon Cart Interpretive Center there. Martin's Cove, I believe, is what it's called, but they have what they call Hell's Gate right there, which that one winter, all those Mormon settlers got stuck in that little canyon right there, and almost all of them ultimately froze to death that year because they weren't able to find food or had the proper clothing to survive a Wyoming winter, especially out in that.
Yeah.
So, anytime you kind of go there, you see that. It is a little kind of makes the hair on your neck stand up and kind of a little chilling to see that these poor people had no idea what they were about to embark upon, but they were willing to do it because they wanted to find something new, So definitely very cool to see that kind of history.
It's a big camp in that area. I've always been told, I don't know if it's really the truth, but, the small tributary creek that dumps into Pathfinder there, the Sweetwater, that it got its name because of the salt and sulfur content that would build up on the granite, and then throughout rains, when that water would get pushed down, it would make the river water or the creek water there taste sweet.
Really?
And people would stockpile water and kind of get ready to cross the Red Desert, so they'd, hang out and, legend is they'd enjoy the sweet water, right, that they were drinking because of the salt.
Very interesting. I did not know that. That's super cool. That definitely makes sense, but I'm sure, especially out in that kind of country, holy smokes, I couldn't even imagine what you would think as you're showing up here and you've never seen this before. Like, what is this?
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that had to have been nothing short of impressive. It was just cool to see, like, I'm sure some of those people had never seen a buffalo or a bear or a deer or an elk or an Indian or anything for that matter, So the amount of things for those people to witness probably was pretty dang cool. But boy, those people certainly were survivors to be able to make it through that. Yeah, absolutely.
I always think it's kind of wild when you hear like an old rancher, plowing a field around here, and like in Oregon, parts of a piano pop up that like someone ditched during the Oregon Trail, left on the side because they gave up that it wasn't worth hauling grandma's piano all the way out.
And that's the kind of and that's kind of the neat and interesting thing is that every time it rains here, we have a big torrential storm. Is that you never know what's going to get unearthed, and just because there is so much history here of people who were here, of course, before the settlers were here that survived off the land, and not only survived, they thrived, and that's nothing short of impressive as well, just to see that these people were able to figure out a way to carve out a living and really have a successful life here with almost nothing is kind of cool to see, and to see that history and to find, pieces of history of people that didn't have anything and were able to make it. Kind of makes me feel like a wuss, honestly, when you think about it. It's like, wow, these guys didn't have anything, and I can't even go without going to the grocery store. So
I've always been a little, kind of mystified as to like how hard it would be to keep riding, right? Like you ride through certain valleys, and to think like we could just stay here instead of, trying to go find gold or like personally. Multiple places in the state of Wyoming, right? Riding through Teton Park and passing that, and just being, not being like, this is good enough. I'm going to start a life here, right? It would be tough to kind of keep going. Yeah,
I could totally see that. Never even thought about it in that light. That's very interesting. That you see some of the most beautiful country you'll ever put your eyes on. You're like, I think we're just going to keep on. We'll see if there's if the grass is a little greener on the next basin here.
You wonder how many people like get to Oregon and go, shit, I'm turning around and going back. Right?
They were completely full of baloney on that one there. They were way off.
3 days ago, it was really cool back there. I want to go home.
And I'm sure there probably was some of that as well, but just the amount of stuff of people seeing country that they've never laid eyes on, never seen a mountain, never seen any of that, and now they see that.
Yeah.
And it opens their eyes and trying to figure out, okay, now what do we do next? So.
Have you looked into the Pedro Indian thing at all and checked that out ever?
It's kind of funny you ask about that. I don't know a whole lot about it, but my old boss actually enlightened me to these Pedro pygmy people that allegedly inhabited the Pedro Mountains, which are just to the south of us, about 45 minutes. But there is some information of a mummy that was recovered, and there's been a lot of speculation, stories, so on and so forth, on whether or not this was really something that happened or if this is just a farce, and a Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of thing.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, it's extremely interesting, and every time I drive out there, I always find myself wondering, are there really little people up there?
Right.
Or is this just a big, giant fallacy that someone made up?
Yeah. But I think, and I don't know the exact details, but I think they did, or at least it's claimed that they found a very small person. I've heard all kinds of different stuff, but, somewhere like 14 inches, 16 inches, full-grown human, like still in a cave, fully mummified. It's always kind of seems strange, but like there's photos of it, there's evidence of it. I think nowadays the mummy's disappeared, but it seems like it's legit.
Oh, it's definitely something I could be very plausible, I think. I mean, people who have never seen the Pedro Mountains don't know exactly what we're talking about, but when you really examine what the landscape is there, it certainly could harbor and have someone of that size successfully carve out a living.
Yeah.
Where, friends of mine have been up in that country hunting deer and stuff and have found primitive things that would suggest that, there's a very strong potential that there could have been a race of little people that lived up there.
Yeah.
It's just really interesting to see if that really is the case and if there'd be a way to find out more information, because it's just really interesting more or less to see, it's not only here, it's been documented. I know in the Midwest, I've heard that they've also documented grave sites and a lot of stuff that supports that there could have been a race of people, maybe not now, but a very long time ago, that very well could have carved out a living in those mountains.
Yeah, I think when I was kind of reading about it years ago, I picked up that it was like the mummy was found sometime in the 30s, and they estimated up to 500 years old, but it was like naturally mummified due to the environment of Wyoming. My grandpa always used to tell me stories about it, that it was like a disbanded group, like a kicked out group of natives, because they were small in stature and not worthy to the tribe, that they got kicked out and basically found a mountain range that was uninhabited and made it home, and were kind of cave dwellers and would work much like the sheep hunter natives that would, push sheep and other wild animals up into canyons and then kind of build a makeshift corral and gather food that way after they killed them. But
it certainly makes sense, and I think all that could support a valid argument stating that there was at some juncture, maybe it wasn't the most recent time, but at some point that there may have been.
Yeah.
Because if you just look at all the artifacts and everything else that you see around this greater area, it could certainly support that theory for sure.
So much of that mountain range is private.
So
a guy like me kind of wonders, like, I wonder what's up there in some of those rocks, or evidence of what used to be there, right?
Absolutely. And if anyone who's listening has any information or can provide any further information, I mean, I'm always about learning more about this because it's a very interesting thing. Because, of course, it's right here in Casper. It's kind of cool to hear about something that, could be an anomaly or it could really have been something that happened.
Yeah.
But that's what I think makes it so interesting. That keeps you kind of wondering, because what if?
Yeah. I always get a kick out of telling the story as I drive out to the mile. If I have some clients that haven't heard it before, and they keep looking at the mountain range like, no way, and then often they, I hear from them later when they read some other articles or checked it out. They're like, yeah, that does seem kind of legit, It's
kind of a cool conversation piece, because some people probably think you're full of baloney, and then other people are like, wow, this guy isn't just going through, this. But whether it's true or not, it's still something that generates curiosity.
Yeah.
Just like many other things. So it's tough to say, but there's a lot of stuff that could support that this really could be something that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I like one episode or article I kind of looked at, and who knows if it's true or not, but talked about how the mummy was found here, but then sold to a gentleman on the East Coast, and it actually got X-rayed at the Museum of Natural History, and that they dated it, around the age of 60 years old.
Wow.
Like it had fully formed teeth and fully formed canines and like looked like an old man, even though it was a small little thing. And then there's been other speculation that it's a baby that somehow got mummified and survived in this cave, or didn't survive, but the mummy survived in this cave for upwards of 500 years before it was found by some gold miners that just stumbled across it.
No, it's absolutely wild to even think that far ago people, if this is true, could figure out how to preserve a body, and knew about this stuff long before the age of modern medicine and how all that works out and how you would know to do that and how everything was preserved so well, down to even the fingernails still being intact. Mm-hmm. And a lot of evidence that suggested that it sounded like this particular individual did not have a very good end of their life, where there were several broken bones, if I remember correctly, a fractured spine, clavicle. So it kind of makes you wonder what these people knew back then about stuff that, that how did you know to do this, or so on and so forth. So it just creates a lot of interesting things that kind of get the creative juices going and wonder, well, maybe what if, maybe not. But either way, it's still something fun, makes for a good conversation piece and fun to talk about because sometimes people don't necessarily believe you, but it's still fun to come throw them for a little roo there if all else. So
any other weird ones you can think of from like weird history that you've heard of around the area or stuff you know about?
I haven't. The one thing I really find interesting, when I first moved here, my house that when I bought my house here, it backs up to a big giant vacant lot or vacant field, and I actually did some hiking back there, and there's some historical markers where the Oregon Trail actually literally went right behind my house. So I think that's just kind of a neat thing to see, those wheel ruts that have been there, since the 1800s, and if those wheel ruts could talk, what they would tell you, and it's the stories that occurred and the things that happened along that trail. You read about a lot of this stuff, but to actually lay witness to it would be pretty darn cool.
Have you been to the Oregon Trail ruts over by Fort Laramie in the big outdoor museum interpretive center they have there?
No, I haven't been to that one yet.
That one's pretty wild. I think there's a couple of them that are like 8.5 feet deep at this point. And they obviously weren't that deep to begin with because they'd get high centered and that sort of thing. But they say it's further due to like the erosion through the sandstone, that the wheel ruts were intense enough way back when, that now it's like when it rains, it keeps carving the wheel ruts deeper
Wow,
and deeper.
really?
But it's a really, if you ever get a chance, it's super cool. It's super cool.
I find it very interesting. It's just kind of neat to see these people who are just trying to go out and find their own little piece of paradise.
Yeah.
And all the stories I've read and things I've seen on it. But just to have it be that close to home is kind of extra special to me, to know that piece of history of people who basically settled this country because of them. We're here right now, essentially, which is kind of wild to think about, and the trials and tribulations that they had to overcome on the way here, you know, that something as simple as a cold or even a hangnail could end up, could be your demise,
Yeah. There's a lot of unmarked graves, random graves around this area that, they've found multiple, but you'll be walking around out in a big chunk of public land and there'll be a small grave site with a fence around it that explains that it was an unmarked grave that they found that they assume was part of the Oregon Trail system.
Sure.
Yeah.
Where you just kind of got left behind. They didn't have time to give you a proper burial a lot of times and stuff. So it's just
kind of something we take for granted around here too. My much like your situation growing up around here, in our backyard, the Oregon Trail actually came through it, and it was like where my family had our wood pile. And growing up, like my old man would actually cuss the Oregon Trail because we couldn't ever stack our wood pile properly because the ruts were like intense enough.
Really?
The wood pile would always lean. So
wow.
We finally like broke down and got like pallets that we'd lay out to cover them up so that we could stack wood over it, And
wow.
We'd have people like come to Glen Rock to check them out. And then, me being a 9-year-old kid running around like, yeah, they're old wagon ruts. Who cares? Right.
Sure.
Not realizing the significance of it.
You didn't understand it. But then when you think that these people packed up their whole lives and go, we don't know what we're going to do or where we're even going, but I guess we're just going to go embark upon this and hope for the best. And so just to be able to meet one of those people would have been really cool, just to be able to shoot the breeze with someone and the stories and the stuff that they saw and the things they encountered, and some of the people that didn't live to see it past that, whether they encountered a rebel group of Indians or whatever else, but just the stuff that they encountered along the way had to be just crazy.
Wild.
Just wild.
Yeah.
The first time you ever saw a buffalo or a moose, you're like, what's that?
I couldn't imagine.
Like when they
antelope.
Where everyone thought that they were going to fall off the end of the earth when they were coming out here. That's what everyone thought, is that there were dinosaurs down there at the end, is what they said, and these guys are like, let's just go ahead and go explore this country. What's the worst that could happen, So
totally.
Definitely really cool just to see some people who took a chance, and now you get to see all that kind of playing out now.
Yeah.
And we get to see it every day, which is kind of cool,
Yeah.
Not a lot of people have that as their office, so it's definitely kind of a cool perk to the job for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, thanks for coming in.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Blake.
Thank you for listening to the Ugly Bug Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you have questions or feedback, reach out to us via email at info@uglybugpodcast.com or leave a comment on our social networks.